So I should say, very embarrassed, first of all, that when Marcel says you ain't seen nothing yet, you've seen quite a bit. And in fact, I can hardly understate the influence of Jan and Sebastian in my work and what you're about to see. I remember meeting the two of them, like some people might remember the assassination of JFK. 1st of May, 2010, Berlin. I met them during a 14-hour layover and left on a transatlantic flight with my head spinning the next morning, and not just because I was hungover. But I saw some of the things that they showed you today. And I was totally blown away. What affected me the most, I think, were the timelines. And I'll dwell here a little bit because of this Chrome bug, maybe you didn't get to appreciate them so well in the last presentation. So I'll show the first study that I did after meeting with Jan and Sebastian about taking their timelines. All of the software to generate them was open source, so I used it, and I made this really silly interface where I matched the size of the timeline with the size of a video frame. And so when you played through the video, you could see exactly how the video was being taken from this, and you could use the timeline to seek and control this. And I made this a little bit like a machine to play with, and you can see now in OXGB that something a little bit like this, but better, has been incorporated into the software. So I started here, and as using this timeline information that inherited into the material almost as an index, and as it's not metadata because it's already in the material, but it's also not the material itself. And I was very interested in this kind of collision. I'll show a little bit of an interface I made to explore what you could do with the timeline. This is what you normally see as a timeline. In most video editors, it's a frame, in this case, every 5 seconds. So in this interface, when I move the mouse from right to left, we crop the image so that we can show it more and more frequently. So here you have half an image every 2.5 seconds. Which half? You can you scroll a little bit to choose which half of the image you want. And what was most interesting about this study was that when you went all the way to the edge, when there was just 1 pixel for every frame, you got what Jan and Sebastian were talking about, which was a slit scan, which seemed to be a very strange way to kind of combine an image, the iconic representation, what holds meaning in this video, and the metadata, the kind of the more technical kind of guide to what will happen, the graph. So these are some of the different slit scans that would be contained in this 60 seconds, or next 60 seconds, next 60 seconds. I like this moment because it's a graph here, a series of images here, and somewhere in between, maybe here, you can't tell anymore if you're looking at images or a graph. You see the part, you see what the image is, and you see how it fits into the whole. And it's almost magic to see 60 seconds and know exactly what is happening in every one of them. I have a lot of things I want to show, so I'll move a little bit quickly. I expanded on these kinds of slit scans and trying to connect the slit scans with the video on a larger case, with a kind of study on Godard films that I showed to a filmmaker, and I'll show you also how this turned into another project. But these are kind of timeline representations of 10 films. When you hover over one, you see the slit scan for this. And then if you click somewhere, the video starts playing through the slit scan, and you can seek around with it, or change the representation a little bit, and see how this thing is moving through. Pick the next clip, play it. I was fixated on this because it kind of alludes to an impossibility of knowing what will happen before it will happen, of having access to video without the tyranny of time, without having to sit and watch the whole thing, to be able to anticipate. And in a media archive with huge amounts of material, this is absolutely essential. But I should interject with a little bit of an advisory, which is, of course, that this is more or less impossible to know everything without seeing it, to know what's in a film without seeing it. I'll show a bit of a project that I think captures that impossibility, and it's one called Periphery. Let's see. So first I'll show one where it kind of works well. Nope. Let's try that again. So it's playback of a video that's been using some of the math from an image stabilizer. One frame is mapped onto the previous frame, and this effect cascades. So you get something like a stabilized video, but at the same time, the edges remain on the screen, so you have access to the past and what has happened before, maybe a little bit like memory works. You have a flattening of the whole plane. A shaky camera then gives you all this information about what has come before, what is on the edge of vision and on the edge of the frame. But when I say this is an advisory, and when I say that it's impossible, I'll show you one of the, maybe this is best explained by showing another film shot, put through the same effect. What happened here is that this is video taken from a bus, and the background is still, but the foreground is moving very quickly. So the flattening of this is at war with itself. It doesn't know whether to move right, as the foreground does, or to stay still, as does the background. The world outside is 3D, and there's no satisfactory way to have everything, to have all of what exists in the world accessible through an interface on your screen. But I'm going to continue because I think we should try. And try to come up with these reductions, try to collapse many things into some very simple interfaces. And I'll show a couple results. Maybe I'll show what ended up with all these Godard films that I was quickly brushing through earlier. And this turned into a collaboration with the filmmaker Eyal Sivan in a project called Montage Interdit. It's online at montageinterdit.net, but I'll show it to you from a hard drive because it works better. And this is a web video project, a documentary directed by Sivan, where all of the films by Jean-Luc Godard were put into this archive and were annotated by a human editor with tags like Africa or Algeria or Arab, anti-Semitism, Christianity. And then there was an additional layer of interviews that were made by various scholars moving through the archive and commenting on it. So this is a kind of Zoom-based interface where you can look at the whole archive, and you could click somewhere like on, let's do Arab, and then this sequence of little clips, parts of the Godard films that are labeled as Arab, will start playing once the hard drive wakes up. Maybe a little sound.
Démasqué par les Arabes, j'étais doublement foutu.
Oui.
Je pense à une histoire arabe. C'est un type qui décroche le téléphone et qui dit allô. On lui répond non, c'est Ali.
On le déshabille?
Oui.
Si j'avais crié, il m'aurait de nouveau assommé. Mieux valait accepter le combat.
Il est d'origine arabe et elle est juive.
And you see when one clip plays, this is from Le Petit Soldat, and this clip ends, it goes to the next one, to Amour. And you have a little bit of an index of what this clip is. This is from the film Amour, directed by Jean-Luc Godard. And it's been labeled, this moment of time is belonging into the Arab category, where we are, and the Jew category. And what I learned with this interface, and this relationship with Eyal Sivan, was, this was a real study in the idea of a continuity. And what this was, what I was trying to do with this was to make a documentary that was also an archive. So you can be playing a film, and you can have the film never stop, but you can still navigate through it. So I can click on the Jew tag while this is playing, and it continues playing, but we begin watching this within the context of Jew. Likewise, we could click on the film, and the whole archive would resort by film, but the film would never stop playing at its current position. The only thing that would change would be that the next clip would also be from Amour, and so on. And we could go by film. This is Terror. We could resort by tag and view from the Orient. We're zoomed in so we can see where these films are. But the point is it's very low cost to click around. The film doesn't stop. You don't lose your context. You don't go to a new page. You're presented with a single mode, coherent interface to a film. And it may be a good sell. It doesn't do nearly 1% of what you could do with an archive like Pandora. But it's a different kind of use of the archive as a work in and of itself. The process of a film, in this case, was the process of organizing all of this material, which of course would go into any documentary film. But what we were saying here was that was enough. It was sufficient to organize all of this material, and we could design a user interface that could represent it. So this is indexing through something like 20 hours. I'll show a little bit of how this, I don't want to get too deep into this specific project because it's just a little bit of Eyal's, and it's a little tangential to this, but I'll show also a little bit of the way commentary was incorporated in these clips with an upside down C. We have a scholar discussing it, and we can switch between the scholar and the original, and you can see all of the clips that they're discussing. Go back and forth. I don't think volume is on right now, but you could mix the volume levels a little bit. And yeah, go this way through some idea of commentary. Maybe sometime this year, WebRTC will work well enough that we can actually extend the interface so that anyone with a webcam could start talking over the videos that we're playing to be added into the archive at this moment. When we were working on this project, that was prohibitively difficult. But this sort of thing will be possible soon. Which brings up like a very interesting possibility about these archives being able at some point to break the tyranny of canonical media that is enforced by outdated modes of mass production of the same thing. You can have works that grow, works that expand, that change every time. And in that sense, a work can become the archive, and the archive can be maybe a transitional object that takes us from where we were to where we can be. So I'll show a little bit of what I've been working on for the past few days here, which is a text archive that was trying to take what it could, what I learned maybe from this project and some of the other media work I had done, and apply it to you know, every literary work ever made. And so what I was thinking about from this project was how the idea of a continuity or of a path or of a travel could be applied to books. And I used as the, I didn't have enough money to hire interns to read all the books and tag them, so I used Wikipedia instead, which was a data set that I took offline and wrote a server for. So this, we should always start with anarchism, because this is among the first articles that was put into Wikipedia and always shows up at the top of the dumps. If you want to play with this, it might work if you go to deleuze.local:8080/a/anarchism. Maybe one day we'll have a better way. Not for me. Maybe it'll work for you. I don't know. It's a very rough stage thing. It's just had a little bit of time to kind of throw together and try to connect these things. We have offline Wikipedia. Like in montage interdit, when you click a link, it doesn't break context. It just inserts the page directly into where you clicked it, hierarchical organization. We can recollapse it again. But unlike montage interdit, this is a book interface. So when you click on anarchism has a link to the page My Disillusionment in Russia. And when you click on this, it opens the book, My Disillusionment in Russia by Emma Goldman. And the reader interface could be improved. You have a little bit of a way to move through it by typing pages or clicking on the right of the page to leaf through this book. And you can continue. Now you're reading the Wikipedia article about my disillusionment with books, and you see that there's another link to the follow-up, My Further Disillusionment with Russia, which isn't really a follow-up. It just had some of the chapters that the publishers didn't want to publish at first. So you can keep going in there, go into My Further Disillusionment with Russia. I'm a little disappointed that the interface is still read-only, because I would like this to be editable and as a starting point for making one's own research, dragging books into it, deleting sections that are irrelevant, kind of branching off from Wikipedia as a navigational framework to start research and then extend it. Maybe also putting back to Wikipedia. It could be interesting to move around a little bit here, show a little bit of the scope of this. Who knows what'll happen? We're back in anarchism, authority links to economy and society. Let's see how it goes. Yeah, oh, it's big. Max Weber. So we're using here the local networks cache of libgenesis. I've done some hacky scripts to parse through Wikipedia, and when there are info boxes, I try to convert them to MD5 sums from which one can now find all of these books. I was playing a lot with the citations early on as an interesting a kind of classic Wikipedia moment, maybe. Max Weber. And so here, maybe there's some, this is just a list up top of the cited books that we think we can find. And when you're in the interface and you see this quote, the book shows up. Yeah, this one hasn't transferred over yet. That's what the red means. Let's see. Any other citations here? Exactly. It's not on the local server, but I found an MD5 sum, and it should be possible to get the book. Yeah, we can. For some of them, if they don't work, yeah, back button. Let's see. This one doesn't work. Some of the red books, if they don't work, I have a link to libgenesis for what it would have been, classical sociological theory. I was also thinking that playing with categories would be a lot of fun, because this is a huge organization from Wikipedia. But anyway, I showed this only as a sketch to maybe suggest what could be possible with a book interface that incorporated a few of the principles I discussed before about having a kind of canonical single view and not wrapping everything in metadata, and about having a very low cost to browse and click and navigate, and having as direct as possible a relationship to the original material, but also some kind of organizational thread by which to move through. Let's see, and Yeah, if we have time for it, I thought maybe I would show an audio interface that very few people have seen. It just came up in conversation. Yeah, please, some sound for that would be great. This one was made in very strange circumstance. I'll tell you about it a little bit later. This was a website to go through 1 million songs with an audio-only interface.
Welcome. Type H for help. Arrow keys. Left. Go back. Right. Sort by artist familiarity.
One sec, let's try this again.
Welcome. Type H for help. Arrow keys. Left. Go back. Right. Sort by artist familiarity. Sort by artist latitude. Sort by artist longitude. Behold These Days Berlin 74 by Sharon Birch.
Maybe this is enough to give you the idea of it. What this was doing was it was based on the kind of observation that the single unit of audio is a frame, and these move very quickly. There are 44,000 of them in every second, the way they're stored digitally in general. So you can take 1 million data points for audio and play it in 30 seconds. So I was moving through this index and had ways to sort by different keys. And you would sonify the audio, and you hit the spacebar, it would play the song at this moment. I think there will be a very similar interface for books pretty soon, where there are a couple circles and you can click on one of them. But I show this perhaps with some amount of humor that isn't transmitting, but to show that when you have a huge amount of things, sometimes it is just simply impossible to make an interface to all of it that really allows full navigation and discovery without it being completely random. But maybe it's still worth trying. I could show a few more, maybe more lower level, less developed studies. Like this was an interesting experiment in kind of this game of understanding what would happen in a video based on a little bit of cut detection and then optical flow being mapped here. And maybe as this is getting more into the low level as a bit of an interlude to transition to like, what am I really offering to you? And for programmers, there's a little bit of code that might be interesting on GitHub. Embarrassingly. So there's Segment, which is a video analyzer written in Python and OpenCV. And this gives the kind of optical flow information and also the affine transformations that would be used if you wanted to do something like the periphery example that I showed. You can give it any video and it will give you a JSON, some NumPy arrays and JSON files, and thumbnails and slit scans and whatever. And this is one of the core libraries that I was using for a lot of these experiments. Interlace is online on GitHub also, though it's not very well documented how you would get it set up. I put Hyperopia, what was just the wiki thing, on GitHub. But I haven't pushed yet the branch with the libgen integration, because I wasn't quite sure how to document getting set up with that. But if any of this caught your interest, and you're interested in learning more or about how to use it, talk to me, find me, contact me. Are there any questions?
Great, thank you. That was really great. It's kind of whole world opening up there. But I was interested in the text interface and you know, like, as you're saying about it contributing back to Wikipedia, you know, maybe, you know, sometime and things like that. But like, where is it in its kind of development phase? Is it something you've kind of been playing around for a short time, or?
Yeah, it's about a week in. But it's a project that I've been really wanting to do for a really long time and failing for one reason or another every time I've approached it. The kind of grander idea is just this, it's called Hyperopia, and it's the idea of an offline wiki reader that one can use as the base for a personal wiki and is editable and all of this. And so when I was talking with Marcel about what to do this time, I had the idea that, you know, maybe this just focusing this idea of a bigger project just on books would be enough of a guideline, enough of a constraint to help me get started with it. And maybe it worked. It's at a prototype stage. The wiki stuff is fairly robust. It's very difficult to write a good parser for media wiki templates and tags. It's a kind of language. So I wrote one in JavaScript, but it's very incomplete. Maybe I show again, but with more of an emphasis on what's really not working here. So yeah, some of the templates I just wasn't really dealing with. I just put them in gray, like use DMY dates, infobox, philosopher, and you can click on it to expand. It's like a little bit of a debugging thing. Honestly, I think it's good enough that I've been really distracted from programming by like trying to read and move around with it. But I just like didn't deal with many of the templates that are really crucial to Wikipedia. And the other thing that I haven't worked in yet is there are a couple of databases of links between pages and links of categories. And they're using half of my SSD right now, but that's not really something I could distribute so easily. So I need to think a little bit about a way to compact to its essence some of those tables. So yeah, it's a study, but it shows promise, and I'm interested in pushing it forward, is I guess where to answer your question.
Yeah, no, great, thank you.
Hey, by looking at your interface for books, I remembered one of ideas that I had recently. When writing, when sharing information with people, a lot of things are implied. For example, when you say there's a different thing that you will say to a grown-up or a kid if you want them to, I don't know, go to a store, because kid knows much less. And when I want to share some information with someone, I'm never sure how much that person is in agreement with me. For example, if I want to share an idea, and I'd like to have an interface in which I could write a text, but it would be just a short sentence that you can expand.
Right.
So, and you can expand it really, really deeply down to, I don't know, metaphysics, and then go back up to the conclusion.
Yeah, exactly. And Wikipedia is the perfect place to start. And you could start with a page. If you wanted to say something more specific, you change some things.
Yeah,
but
that's
you
actually,
have that kind of background.
that is Wikipedia, actually. Links,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I would love this interface to exist as well. Let's work on it.
Yeah, if I remember, that would be a good thing to work on this conference.
Definitely.
For one of your initial projects, I think it was a slit scrabbler, you described it as you wanted to make a machine that you could experiment with. And I was wondering if you've thought, especially this last project, fits the aesthetic of the Kindle very well, if you've thought about moving some of your projects to hardware to be an artifact, and how you feel about that.
hardware scares me a little bit. It's hard to change once you make it. But no, I mean, this was explicitly a reading interface, and screens suck for reading that are laptops. I don't know. I know very little about developing for Kindle or how that would work, but absolutely, this should be adapted for e-ink or some kind of e-ink hardware.